am here with my good friend Robert Dufour from Islam for Europeans. And Robert and I have had a chance to get to know each other the last few months from your appearances on the Mad Mamluks. And one of the things that there's a lot of topics I wanted to cover with you, but one thing I don't think we really covered in detail on our other podcast was kind of like the origin story of like, because ultimately the premise of this channel is to understand why people believe what they believe, right? And maybe some of the core principles of what it means to be of European descent, and then how a person of European descent, comes into Islam, and then all the stuff that happens with it, right? So
yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your background. You're from Ontario, Canada, right?
Yeah, small town called Amherstburg, which is 30 minutes south of Windsor.
Okay.
Which is south of Detroit. It's basically the border city to Detroit. Born and raised there. It's a very white town, Amherstburg, but it's a lovely town. You should visit it one day. But yeah, grew up with with me and my brother and my mom and dad. My dad was a stand-up comedian. He toured all around North America doing stand-up comedy shows. So he would go on the road a lot. He was basically kind of like the life of a trucker. So he would be gone for weeks, and then be home for weeks. But did a lot of he did shows in a lot of seedy nightclubs where it was like a really bad environments, and he worked really hard to support us. And then my mom, took care of me and my brother. Went to a Catholic high school, Catholic grade school as well too. They put us in a Catholic high school because basically, was our background. So they wanted to have some religious foundation, but they themselves were not practicing very much. They would just, they were kind of like Easter and Christmas Catholics. So kind of just on paper. And then growing up in high school, I didn't really think that much about religion, even when I went to a Catholic school. I mean, I was a topic because it was a religious school and everything. Looking back, like we always thought about what are we doing here? What's the purpose of our life? And me and my friends would have these philosophical conversations during lunch. Like what if this is all a dream? Like what if this is just all not real? But we never really believed in Christianity. We kind of thought it was kind of like a kind of like a really just like a fairy tale. Like there's just no proof. Like how do you? Yeah. The Bible, it's written, it's been translated so many times, and there's so many. It's so difficult to read, and it's such a bizarre. There's so many bizarre stories in it. How can we tell if it's true or not? Right. I remember reading it, on my own a few times. I didn't really kind of get it. Like it didn't really apply to what was going on in real life. I will say this, like I guess Allah was preparing me for the life ahead of me. We actually. We had a Catholic class. We had to take religious classes all the way up until grade 12. We actually visited the mosque in Windsor, the main mosque in Windsor, which ended up being the place where I took my Shahada.
So this was in high school, by the way, when you made that visit?
This was in grade 10, and I didn't think much of it at all, really, when I first, because we all went as a class. We went to an Orthodox church, went to a Hindu temple, and like we didn't really think that much about either of them really, but then we went to the mosque, and I guess I was kind of curious because we were all sitting on the floor, we were watching like the Musallin pray, the people praying, and I just thought I thought in my head, I thought, wow, this is taking quite a while, like for us, like you got to remember, like Catholic prayer, just like fold your hands and just say, like a couple Hail Marys, and that's it. So it's like just a couple seconds, right? But this was involved. It was like a couple of minutes long. It was, like codified set of rules on how to pray and everything. So first impressions, I thought it was odd, but at the same time, like I wanted to ask, because it was a sister who was basically giving us the instructions and everything. She was wearing a hijab. Yep. And I wanted to ask her, like, do you guys believe in the day of judgment? Like I wanted to ask that question, but I never really ended up asking it really. So, that was all that really happened. That was really the only exposure I had to Islam up until that point, until I graduated high school. Yeah. until
So I want to slow down for a second so we can get caught up a little bit. Your family is Roman Catholic by tradition, right? Religious tradition. Is that right?
on paper, but they weren't. They would just go to church basically to kind of appease our extended family members. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, or just because it was basically like part of their culture. So
Sure.
they, and plus our great aunts, she was like the matriarch of the family, and she liked when we go to church too. So we once in a while we would go there. So
yeah. What how many generations has your family been in Canada?
Well, my dad's side of the family, they're third, fourth generation Canadians.
From where originally? France. The Dufour name is. I didn't want to like stereotype, but
No, it is. No, it's as French as you can get. Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, oddly enough, he knew French as a child, but he lost it when they basically went to an English school. He went to an English high school and lost all of his French. So I'm the only one left in my family that knows French, and I relearned French after I converted to Islam.
Okay.
Oddly enough. So
I didn't know. And on your mom's side, where in Europe are they from?
So they were American. They're like 3 or 4 generation. Actually, like I think 3rd generation Americans. On her mother's side, it's more Eastern European, actually stretching into Asia. So Armenia and Poland. Well, her father's side is actually no, her father's side was Polish and Armenian. So it's kind of a mixture of like Eastern European and like English and Dutch. So kind of an amalgam of different European cultures, and then they all immigrated to America. So
I got you. So like it was kind of like this, when I lived in Toronto. I think we've talked about this before. When I lived in Toronto, in general, I guess it's like this in America too. To be honest, it's like I was having lunch with a former coworker today, and I was telling him. So I'll lay the context for this real quick. We can go. That's a little tangent to start. I like tangents. I'm doing a podcast on Saturday morning with 2 Christian folks who are like evangelical style, and one of them is actually like seems to be a friend of Sam Shimon. I found out, because I was like doing some research. He's a local pastor in Chicago, and they got in. You probably heard. I don't know if I've talked about this on the previous shows. Like there's this drama with this restaurant called Nini's Deli, and they got canceled and all that, right?
Yeah.
So the guys involved on the church side are coming on the show because they liked our perspective. Because like basically I was on with 2 other with my friends Nabil and Adil, and we were talking about like, the Christians think that Islam is evil. That's fine. I mean, that's their right to their belief. It would make sense for them to believe Islam is evil. Like, like that would be the logical conclusion. So these guys really like appreciated that, right? I was like, y'all are so nice. Y'all like are going to hell and are okay with it. But I was talking to one of the guys on Messenger of the weekend, kind of, and it was funny because he came at me pretty direct. We were just chatting, and he was like, "Hey, Maheen, have you heard of the gospel?" And I was like, you mean like the gospel of Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John? He's like, well, I meant more generally like the idea that Jesus came to die for your sins, Maheen, and save and all this, And I was like, okay. And then he's like, are you ready to like leave Islam and follow Jesus? And I was like, no, I'm good. Actually, I think I follow Jesus better than you.
Yeah.
So that's what I said, kind of. Right. And I was like, we kind of went back and forth a little bit. It was cool. But I was showing this to one of my coworkers. He's a younger dude today. I was just like talking about it. And he's someone who's like, I didn't know people like this existed. And this is a white American guy who said this. I'm like, wow. Yeah. I'm like, weren't you in college? Don't you remember like Campus Crusade for Christ? And he's like, yeah, just stay the hell away from those folks. So, I mean, because there'd be some dude, and like I remember at Ohio State, there'd be some old dude always screaming on the Oval about like the end of days coming and Revelation and quoting from Revelation, et cetera, et cetera. So I was like, it's I mean, it seems to be pretty prevalent. It just depends. You gotta get around a little bit, right? But that's the perception I got of my time in Canada as well. Like what my coworker today told me, that most white Canadians that I knew were not really. I don't think to be honest, I can think of one white Canadian that I met in my time there who was, like, I would say religious, and that dude was a Muslim that I met for 20 minutes at the Musalla at the
You
University.
cut out of me for.
Yeah, I cut out for a second. Yeah, so in my 2.5 years of living in Toronto, the only white Canadian that I ever met that was religious was one Muslim dude. My encounter with him was about 20 minutes long, and I met him at the Musalla at the University of Toronto, on Bloor Street, one time, and that was it. And he had a profound effect on my life, to be honest, because of my conversation with him. But that was my impression of Canadians, that it's a very secular kind of outlook. Obviously, it's diverse. You don't want to like generalize, but it's the kind of Canadians I found that pride themselves in. Y'all have like I at least found that y'all have a very like nationalistic pride, but it's a different type of nationalism than what you would see. It's not like specific to one race. It's a very inclusive nationalism, is what I saw in Toronto. That's my.
Well, we always say that. Yeah, well, we always say that United States is a melting pot. Canada is a cultural mosaic. So you come to Canada, instead of being all Canadian in terms of this kind of like this homogenous attempt at creating complete homogeneity, right? I don't know if you listen to Immortal Technique.
I just heard of them, and I listened to that song, Dance the Devil. Oh man, that was dark. That was my introduction to them. Like,
very dark.
Mort was telling me about them, so I listened to it. Literally last week, I was like, whoa, this is crazy.
Yeah, he says we're burning in the melting pot. That's where that comes from. So Canada, in contrast, is a cultural mosaic. So come to Canada, bring your culture.
Yep.
You're still Canadian, but still keep the your culture from back home, and that includes European cultures, right? So that's why you still see there's like a military proceeding or like any type of like things going on from in like sort of like a white Canadian context. You'll see the bagpipes, you'll see the kilts, because a lot of descended from the Scots. You'll see the Irish bagpipes and things like that. So even I think that's why Canada's sort of kind of managed to sort of curtail the kind of the racial strife that you see in the United States to an extent, especially in Toronto. I mean, again, there's still problems, but it's not to the same extent that it is in the United States. And another thing having to do with Canadian identity is that we pride ourselves on kind of being different from the Americans. Like we look at America as like, okay, it's kind of like Brett Favre, like gunslinger, like threw so many touchdowns, but also so many interceptions, right? And then when Aaron Rodgers came around in Green Bay, all the coaches like, okay, you see Brett Favre throwing this interception, don't do this, right? So that's how we kind of pride ourselves. I don't want to say we're anti-American. We look at it. I don't know. I guess even when I was in high school, we kind of had this anti-American sentiment, which is unfortunate because my mom's American and everything, but but it's always trying to be kind of different from the American. So when we see some of the things going on, like mob violence and racism and things like that, Canada's just like, let's just chill. Let's it's kind of haram, but let's have a beer, and now let's smoke some weed. But like that's kind of the attitude that we kind of have now. So I mean, that's the general Canadian kind of mindset. Not to say that there's not problems. I mean, there's a lot of, even in my small town, I'll be the first to admit, there's a lot of haram and bad stuff going on in those small towns, man. Like bush parties and drinking and just crazy behavior, I mean, it's like, I'm not going to say we don't have our own problems.
Yeah. So I remember I was in Canada. I was living in Toronto during 9/11 when 9/11 happened, right? Yeah. And before 9/11, you saw every Canadian had the Canada flag on their backpack, right? roots. I mean, they're very Canadian brands. And again, didn't matter if you were Asian or European, South Asian, etc. And because before 9/11, you didn't see the American flag just flying randomly in America.
No.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, but Canada always had this, and like there was so I can relate to what you were saying. They used to always make fun of me for my accent. Right? I don't like
American.
I didn't know I had an accent. Right? So I remember I was at an Amway. I used to do Amway. I got into Amway when I was in Canada, right?
Yeah.
You know, so I was in the Amway function one time in Markham, and met this guy named Jamie, and Jamie was like, we're talking. He's like, man, look at you, American, man. You got the accent, everything. And I was like, accent? You're the one with the accent, not me. And he's like, listen, bub, you're in my country. You know what I'm saying? But no, but you definitely, I would say the stereotypes, the positive stereotypes about Canadians in generally are like friendly folks, you know, very inclusive. I never, the cliques, I didn't see cliques in college at my time at University of Toronto that were very like, you know, European like only, you know what I'm saying? Folks just got along. They help. Friends all from all backgrounds.
Yeah, once you get out of Toronto, like it's very white. I mean, like it's, you know, I'm not gonna lie, like it's very homogenous. You know, but you still have, you know, like there were many African Americans that who went to Canada basically via the Underground Railroad. And found you know, salvage there and ended up you know, starting their own communities. Like if you go to these small towns like Chatham, there's like 42,000 people, and there's a small African American, African Canadian population. So, but for the most part, it gets more, you know, like it basically gets more European once you get out of, you know, the Toronto area. Right. But still, I mean, you know, like you know, I'm in London right now. It's pretty cosmopolitan. You know, like the smaller towns are very European, but like I said, I mean, you know, it was interesting. I lived in Toronto for 2.5 years, and you know, like you said, Toronto has every culture in the world there. You know, like you know, like you hear basically like 8 languages when you go to the supermarket, right? You don't see many, you know, white people in Toronto that much anymore. But I remember going to the Maple Leafs game, and you can go to what they call Maple Leaf Square, also Jurassic Park, to watch the Raptors games, the same place. So, and I remember going there. It's like, you know, I've been in Toronto for like a couple of months, and I go there, and it's just a sea of like just white Canadians, like 95% white Canadians, all with like Maple Leaf, you know, like shirts and hats and everything, watching intently on the giant screen outdoors. And this game went to overtime. They were playing the Capitals, so they show and then between the periods in overtime on CBC, you know, they'll play the news, right? So they play the news, and Donald Trump's face came on, and the whole crowd was like, boo.
Yeah.
So it's like, wow, I'm actually with my nation right now.
Right.
So, but you know, it's I think for the most part, I mean, there's again, like I'm not gonna lie, like and then we'll get more into this later, but part of Islam for Europeans, it's not just for white people searching Islam. This is a solution for everybody, including, you know, I guess, I don't know if they call them liberal Muslims, but the more left-leaning, kind of like Marxist, you know, Muslims that really have a problem with colonialism and white people in general. I have a lot of anger and resentment towards, you know, white people from a European background. And then that's that resentment, you know, like I'm not going to be able to get rid of that, but this is a solution for everybody that hopefully will alleviate, you know, this pressure cooker situation that's in 2020 is just getting worse and worse.
Right.
So, but
back to your, so now you're in high school, you're going around. Would you say the mosque was the only spot that really held some attention? Like when you went to the Hindu temple, I've been to a Hindu temple. I was like 7 or 8. I remember riding on an elephant. But that's all I remember. I don't remember actually going inside, but like for example, when you go to Hindu temple, what did you see?
We saw, like, you know, like we were all sitting down, we all took our shoes off, we just noticed that there's a very odd smell. Like we just couldn't, put it was like incense or something. But they had the one picture of the one word that said Om, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then like the different pictures of all the different gods, like in the front and center and everything. And that was, that's all we could remember. So we asked some questions and things like that, but we didn't really, I don't know, I'm trying to remember just taking much out of it, but I don't know, like it was more of a novelty than anything. So we didn't really, I guess the mosque was near the end, so we didn't really talk about it that much, but I guess, I guess the Hindu temple sort of caught our eye the most. Whereas, the Orthodox church, again, we were raised Catholic. So, I mean, like, it was just more similar, to like a Catholic church. But, yeah, I don't know. I guess we didn't really think much of it at the time. It was kind of latent in our minds. So it just, yeah, I mean, it didn't really have much to say about it. Other than that, it was just an interesting experience, but it was different. It was, it got us out of our comfort zone and had us explore a new world, basically. So it was interesting. It was interesting to say the least.
So then it's like one of these things, right? You're always talking about when like, let's say people of different, everyone's got a different approach, right? Like I was sharing an example of my buddy Jose from the church. He came at me really direct, right? It's like trying to have sex on the first night. You know, that's what I mean, like just got like, before the date even. It's like, oh, before, like,
want to smash?
Yeah, before the date. My approach has always been like, it depends on the person. It's case by case. When I talk to people about Islam, I don't talk to everybody about Islam, to be honest. It's kind of like, because we have work. You can't really talk about it at work, technically, right? People ask questions. You can ask, but generally I've always been like, well, let's see, you're planting seeds, right? You don't know. You don't know. That's been my mindset in a way, because people at the end of the day, the way I understand, even my own, like, as I look at my own spiritual journey, I think about all these instances of people I met. Like I talk about this guy named Mikhail that I met in Toronto, the white dude I mentioned at the Musalla for 20 minutes. I met him 20 years ago, but he's still a part of my story. It is like these little seeds that people planted, and sometimes sometimes they don't even know that they're trying to plant something. They're just like there, and then you piece it all together, right? So this entire like life, when it comes to like the spiritual aspect of life, is like a journey, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like that. That's kind of how I've looked at it. So would you say that looking back, that 10th grade experience was like the first seed?
I think so. I think so. I mean, like something was there, like I couldn't put my finger on it. And I think I just had a small date with like my first ever date occurred like a week beforehand. Right. Mm-hmm. And then it turned out that, it didn't work out. And I was just kind of distraught just over this one date, like, because I was just a really sensitive guy. And like, I was just kind of just distraught and everything. And then this happens. So I don't know, like I just felt kind of fine after that. Because I think another thing that I want to point out is that all of my classmates did all this stuff that is Islamically unacceptable in large amounts: alcohol and dating and gambling, right? Whenever I got even near to these things, I would just feel sick to my stomach, literally, like I wanted to throw up.
No, how far are you? You're pretty close to Windsor, right? You said?
Yeah,
so
Windsor, Ontario.
Windsor's like the big gambling town, right?
Yeah, it's got the casino there. I know. Yeah. It's got the casino.
And then
there.
I was thinking we talked about being Canadian. I mean, Molson, I am Canadian.
Yeah, I know.
I know. So it's all like, I've always felt like beer is like a big part of being Canadian.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these European cultures, like whatever you think, or even just non-European cultures, you think of like, what their culture's like. You think of the beer, basically,
right?
Like Canada, Molson, American Coors, Japan, Sapporo, like it's embedded into the culture. So, I mean, there's some things we can't do anymore as Muslims, but we keep the good cultural things and leave the bad. But you're right. I mean, and like I said, there are things in this culture that, like are just, like sort of just being like the downfall of basically the West. And if you read René Gounon's Crisis of the Modern World, highly recommend it. Mm-hmm. It talks about this, that, a lot of these decadent things that like that the West is just so heavily immersed in, it's leading to their downfall, and loss of spirituality. Whereas, like, and that's why we look towards the East for guidance, right? But you're right. I mean, it's embedded in the culture.
Yeah. So, but you mentioned interestingly that, like, even in high school, because a lot of times you hear Muslim kids who grew up Muslim, and they almost feel like restricted by the rules, like, right, like, we can't date, can't mess with girls. For me, alcohol wasn't really a thing. I mean, it never like appealed to me, right? Because I wasn't really like exposed to it until I went to school in Toronto.
Yeah.
I just saw, I was like, we're already broke college students. Why y'all like? And I mean, I would go out with people, but then I would see them paying like $8-9 for a beer.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, nah, I'd rather spend it on like a Harvey's combo meal with some poutine, right? That poutine was I used to love poutine, and now, so then anyway, so I was just like, that didn't appeal to me, but there's other things I think that appealed, like, especially like the opposite gender was always the thing. And you're like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
So it's interesting enough, you had these things available to you. There was no like problem on a societal level for you to engage in any of this stuff, right?
Well, the thing is, there's so much pressure. So, like, you just feel like, what's wrong with me? Like, do I not belong? And, like, like, there's always this feeling that you're like a stranger in this world. And it was a very, difficult time because, like, you just feel like you don't fit in, like, even if I had more than just half a beer, I would just feel sick to my stomach, like, or getting close to a girl, like I just I don't know, it was like, what the hell's wrong with me, man? So I guess it was just a law protecting me during this time, and I didn't realize it.
What time frame are we looking at? Like, are we talking like early 90s here?
Yeah. So mid to 95 to 99 was when I was in high school. So this was, like, Green Day and Pearl Jam and Radiohead and so that era.
So you and I are exactly almost. You might be a year older because 99, because you guys had that weird grade 13 OAC year, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the victory lap.
I mean, the extra grade 13. So that you did your OAC year 99?
Yeah, I didn't need to, but I didn't know what I was going to do. So
right, yeah. So I remember that time in Canada, like, because I arrived in Toronto in September 99 as a 17-year-old kid. Right. So yeah, no, that's the thing. So then you're out of high school. So what's going on next? Do you go to college or what?
No, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go to college. I don't want to go to university. I just thought, I just had in my head, it's going to cost too much. And like a lot of people, they get the degree and they don't get the jobs they want. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I got a book on hypnosis as a Christmas present. And then I wanted to become a hypnotherapist. So I went to classes, hypnotherapy classes in Lansing, Michigan. And I got my first job. I got my first car. And this was working at a pizza place for Turkish immigrants. So they were kind of culturally Muslim.
So now, you're living in Lansing, Michigan now?
No, I was driving to Lansing, Michigan every other weekend to take classes, then driving all the way back. So it was like a 2-hour drive.
Okay.
But I was still living in my hometown, and this was a pizza place, and the boss is hard nosed, man. Like you had to work your ass off. You had to, like, be on top of things, and I was just an idiot. Like, I just didn't know how to work. Like, I was just basically didn't have many job skills, and they taught me a lot. And again, they were culturally Muslim, so I mean, then I had one friend of theirs who was practicing, so he was fasting during Ramadan. So this was my second exposure to Islam. So even though they weren't practicing, you still saw like they were very, like it was like exposure to like the Turkish culture. They were very generous. They always made food for us and everything. So, and the one guy who was kind of semi-practicing, like he would fast during Ramadan. And I didn't really ask him that many questions, but, it was still kind of latent there. So that's another thing. And during these kind of 3-year period, I was getting more friends. I was, like becoming more into my own, like I was learning the job skills. I still didn't have a girlfriend, but like I was still, trying to just work my way into getting getting into the workforce. And this is when I started to, then 9/11 happened. So when I was working at the pizza place, 9/11 happened, right? And, everyone was angry. Everyone was really angry, like they got mad at the government, mad at, Muslims in general. Like I remember at the comedy club that my parents run, they had like Osama bin Laden urinal cakes, so, like they like a lot of like stuff against, like Muslims and Arabs in general. Like people were just very angry. And you got to understand, Windsor's on the border with, Detroit. So you got all the American radio stations, the American TV stations, the Christian conservative channels. So we get absorbed by a lot of this stuff, all this stuff coming in. So months later, and it's kind of controversial, but like my dad had a friend, and this friend was actually a white nationalist. So while I'm talking to this guy off and on, I'm also studying Islam because I was starting to get curious about Islam, and because of 9/11, I'm like I was into conspiracy theories. I was I thought the moon landings weren't real. Like the JFK assassination. So I had a very inquisitive mind, right? So when I was in 9/11, so when I studied 9/11, I looked into that as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like he started talking about 9/11 and everything, and who's actually running the show, and like while this is going on, I'm studying Islam at the same time, and I'd watched Malcolm X a few months beforehand as well, so that had an impact as well. I didn't think much of it the first time. I know I'm just bouncing off all corners, but these kind of things kind of interplayed at the same time, right?
Well, that's how it works, though, right? Like I said, it isn't like you're walking down the street, you never heard about Islam, and you're at some dawah table, or like, hey, Robert, what is the purpose of life? It's like, I haven't really thought about that. It's like, well, the Holy Quran says that we were created to worship God, and in Islam we call it Allah. Would you like to be a Muslim? That sounds fantastic. Where do I sign up? If only it was that easy.
I know. It doesn't happen that way.
No, right. There's like seeds, right? There's like plants, things that and then your life experiences, right? You're probably grappling. I mean, I'm interested in understanding is like, I don't know when you came to this realization where as a youth, you talk about you were repulsed by the dating scene, the casinos, the alcohol. And then you come to find this worldview that like appreciates all that.
Yeah.
That's like, I don't know was that like, so anyway, sorry to cut you off, but like, so you're studying Islam. When did things start clicking, or what were the things that appealed to you up front?
The first time I looked up I knew a little bit about Islam from the movie Malcolm X, the Spike Lee movie, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't think much of it. The first time, I didn't think much of it. The only thing I got out of it was that, like, Muslims, when they get married, they have to be around the same height.
How old were you when you watched it the first time?
21.
Okay.
21.
21. Okay. And then you watched it again at what age?
It's around the same age, 22. I gave it a second watch.
A second one. Okay. Gotcha.
So the second time had more of an effect on me because I knew we went to Hajj, and I knew that, like, hey, white people can be Muslim too, right? And the Hajj, like the seams of the Hajj, that really just like floored me. It's kind of that kind of impressed me a little bit more. I just like, wow, like Malcolm went through all these horrible things, like white people oppress him, they oppress his family members. Like he gets involved with the Black nationalist movement. Then like he goes and he sees, and he sees people with the same skin colors as oppressors, but they don't have this mentality, and it just erases. There's just like no animosity at all, and it just completely changes his worldview.
So the Hajj scene didn't really. You kind of just glossed over it the first time. Is that what it was there? It's like, oh, cool, but it's like just another movie scene. Yeah, I got you. Okay.
Yeah. So then I started to think about it more. And the other scene that kind of caught my eye was when, the white lady went up to Malcolm X originally, when he's still in NOI. And he's like, what can I as a white person do to help you guys out? And he's like, nothing. Right. And then you just see the look on her face, like, just distraught look on her face. Right. And that had an effect on me as well too. And then afterwards, when I read, like the autobiographies, I totally, Malcolm said, I regretted that moment, right? So that's interplaying. My conversations with my dad's friend, who was a white nationalist, was interplaying. He's talking, because he, I guess back then he was, like back then they were way more pro-Palestinian and thus pro-Muslim than, a lot of them are right now, but they're coming back. So he was, talking about how like the Palestinian.
Was that almost like the angle of like David Duke angle about like how the Jew, the Zionists and that, some of that angle? Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. So, but I mean, at the same time, they were incredibly racist. I mean, and I was grappling this, who do I join? What he's saying is making sense in terms of who's running what. But then, he points me to like these websites like Stormfront and Thor's Hammer. I feel like I had to take a shower after I listened to this. I was just like, ugh. I mean, like, it's just awful. It's just so like, it's just so like prideful and boastful. Like, oh yeah, we're white people. We're born white. We have all the advantages. And that just turned me off after a while, so after a very short time. So that's going on. There's the conversations with the Jehovah's Witnesses, like door to door, like I'm talking to them once in a while. But with Islam, as soon as I went on the computer, ISLAM, I just, okay, let's just learn about it. ISLAM, enter. First website has a picture of an unborn baby in the mother's womb. It's like, what does this have to do with Islam? Do I have the right website? And then it talks about all the scientific miracles in the Quran, how the mountains are like pegs, how the universe is expanding, the mathematical miracles. I was floored. I was just like, what? How can a human being write a book like this? It's impossible. I mean, like, there's your evidence right there. I mean, it was always like the proof we were, always looking for right there. So I read Surat al-Baqarah in like one sitting, and that's when the ball got rolling. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just read it on the internet. I was still living with my parents. I would go on the internet late at night and just read up on Islam more and more and more and more.
So on that angle, right? So this is something I have a hard time explaining to non-Muslims, because this whole thing of the embryo and like how God created us from a clot of blood.
Yeah.
But it's like when we translate it, like, what's a clot? Like, that's the thing. Like, what does that even mean? So sometimes it's like these weird, and when you read rebuttals of this narrative by anti-Muslim apologists, they would like throw in these like, oh, this is the different translations, actually wrong, etc., etc. Yeah. So how did you like feel that part out? Like,
well, at the time I was just so floored by some of them that I'm just like, I just accept them now. Whatever people say, like, there's no way around some of these evidences. Like, there's no way you can know that, like, that's
the stages of the child in the womb kind of thing.
Yeah, or the Dead Sea being the lowest point on the face of the earth. Like, there's no way anyone could have known any of that stuff. Like, that's like just, or the fact that, like, I don't know if you know, did you see this one? I don't think I knew this till after I converted. If you go on an Excel file and you add up, you put in 4 columns, like the first column is like surahs 1 all the way to 114. So add all those up. You get the number 6,555. Then you go in the next column, you put the corresponding number of ayahs in each chapter, right? Add those all up. You get the number 6,236. Okay. Then in column 3, you add the sum of every single surah number and their corresponding number of ayahs. If it's an odd number, you put it in column 3. If it's an even number, you put it in column 4. And you add up all the totals. You'll get the numbers for the column C and D, 6,555 and 6,236.
Okay. So what's the 600, 500 thing though? There's like one
that's
right?
That's like the Fibonacci sequence, 1 all the way up to 114. So if you add up surahs, the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way up to 114, you get the number 6,555.
Okay.
And if you add up,
so it's 6,5. The 6,5 numbers, the Fibonacci sequence, and what's the 6,200 one?
6,200. There's 6,236 ayahs in the entire Quran.
Right.
So if you add up the surah number and the number of ayahs in each surah.
So basically 114 factorial is 6,600. Okay.
6,555.
Okay.
So if you add up the surah number and the number of ayahs in each surah, right?
Yeah.
You'll get 57 odd numbers and 57 even numbers. If you add up all 57 odd numbers, you get 6,555. If you add up all the even numbers, you get 6,236.
Right.
And even if one ayah was out of place, like like it would just mess up the sequence. So I was just like, how do you just, like, again, now that I'm older, I guess I don't put that much weight into the scientific miracles of the Quran, just because, again, it was such a spiritual experience, and I know in my heart that it's the right path. But at the time, I just didn't care about what some of these apologists said and everything. I'm just like, there's no way around it.
in your experience, if someone came to you out of the blue and was like, "Hey, Robert, I want to why do you believe Islam is true?"
No.
What how do you come at them, or are you like, what would be your pitch?
Well, there's more than one way to look at it. I mean, like, a lot of I'm one of the rarities where, the miracles of the Quran did it for me. You can look at sort of the fact that the Quran has been preserved. The Quran in South Africa is the same as the Quran in Japan, and like Quran in the United States, and Allah said he would preserve it. There's the there's other ways to look at it as well, like the fact that all the previous prophets are mentioned in the Quran, and the Bible talks so many times about the coming prophets, and like how it's going to be like coming with 10,000 saints, very specific like prophecies, but there's other things too that it had nothing to do with the Quran in general. Like, even in Hindu texts, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is mentioned by name, right?
Really?
It's very specific about the Muslims. Yes. And he's mentioned by name, and they're going to be meat eaters, and it's very specific about what the Muslims, and they're going to come to the South Asian subcontinent. So even if you're not a Hindu, like, to me, that's a proof of Islam, even though I'm not Hindu, because, like, how did they get this information?
Right.
Or if you look at it just from a practical perspective, I mean, like, the Muslims are just so outnumbered, absolutely, totally outnumbered by the pagans. Like, they should have been wiped out. Just watch the movie The Message and just see how improbable it was that they, would have survived. And the fact that, like, people look at the splitting of the moon as like a proof that Islam isn't true. But really, if you think about it, I think the splitting of the moon, was that during the Meccan era?
Was there two different instances or one? I know there's the, I don't remember. I'm not a,
yeah.
I'm not a good, I don't have an expertise in Sirah.
Neither do I. But just in general, if the moon splitting didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
All the Muslims have been like, all right, this wasn't real. I mean, it was an ayah in the Quran. You said it was going to happen. It didn't happen. But the opposite happened. More people became Muslim after the splitting of the moon, So, I mean, like, and now there's evidence.
So, like, now some people would say, couldn't you, isn't that like circular reasoning? Couldn't you say that about the resurrection of Christ? As an example, as a parallel example kind of thing, right? I guess what you're saying, though, is this, though, that Muslims, like, I can't even really explain to you the splitting of the moon. Like, it's not core to our belief system, is what I guess what it is, right? The resurrection is critical for the Christian. The splitting of the moon is not critical for the Muslim. It's not like it's, what I'm saying? These are like small little signs, I guess, as you're putting the puzzle together kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, a lot of, the Christianity didn't spend really that much in Europe and the rest of the world after Paul came around. So, I mean, like, I'm just looking at it from a practical perspective.
You're saying the growth of early Christianity was much slower than the growth of Islam, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and the claims are so unbelievably high, like, and like, think about it. How many other people in that general region of the earth would have seen the moon splitting? Like there's evidence of it being shown in, like being written down in China, so they must have looked at the early people who just see all these Muslims come in and they see the ayah of the Quran, the moon being split. It's like, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
Had it not been there, just like, I didn't see that. So just from a logical perspective, I mean, but again, it's up to the Allah guides the hearts,
right? It's almost
we can
like
show them so many evidences, but at the end of the day,
it's almost like the way I have always approached it is, again, you ask the question, you kind of try to see what's going on, right? And sometimes you just share your personal experience, right? But sometimes it's like if the person's looking, then you can kind of angle things accordingly. So then you research the Baqarah, and then it's, is it pretty much, it's on from there?
Yeah, it's on. Yeah, I didn't tell anyone about it. I had this amazing dream. I saw this huge beam of light after feeding like a poor person, during Ramadan. And then, studied 8-9 months, didn't tell anyone about it. And I went to the same mosque I went to when I was in high school. I was very reluctant at the beginning, very reluctant. I actually knew where the mosque was. I would drive to the mosque parking lot and just sit in the parking lot and just contemplate whether I should go in. Because a lot of people, even if they have a positive or neutral image of Islam, they're terrified of going in because it's just, they don't know how people are going to react. They don't know what's going to happen. So, for Muslims, people are born into Islam. It's like their place of solace. But for non-Muslims, it's enemy territory. So I mean, and that's why for us, it just seems like it's in a very foreign place. But when I finally came to that day during Ramadan, I saw some African Canadian brothers. I said, Assalamu alaikum. They said, Wa alaikum salam. And then I talked to a brother from the Tablighi Jamaat, and I ended up taking my Shahada that day, actually. So that was the first day that I went there.
And this is what, 2002-ish?
2003.
2003. Okay, gotcha. I think there's every story is unique, and some people that are bored with these stories. I mean, I think every story is really unique and interesting from a point of view of, because your stuff you never heard of, right? I don't know that I've actually heard someone tell me that their hook was the miracles, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Everyone's got a different thing. It's almost like, do you as someone who comes from a very and I like how you really made it clear that you didn't come from a practicing Christian family or a practicing Roman Catholic family, because sometimes what I see happening is, and I think this is a little disingenuous, is that people try to portray all these former Christians who are Muslims. And I think that, certainly there are some legitimate former Christians like Yusuf Estes or Yusha Evans or, or who else? Dr. Omar Farooq Abdullah, even they had studied it. But oftentimes it's people from these very secular backgrounds who don't have much of an attachment to the church at all.
True.
And, it wasn't a big deal for them, right? Because that changes the thing. So now as we transition into this topic of this, you have this, because, Islam for Europeans, which is as I see it, a space for people of European descent to navigate, to be able to comfortable in their faith, but also hang on to the parts of their European heritage that's compatible with Islam, that isn't in conflict, no booze, sorry, beer's out, but hey, if you want to watch it, if you're of Dutch heritage and you want to follow the Dutch national football team, then that's cool. You know what I'm saying? That should be a thing, who knows? But that's how I've seen it. But for some reason, and I want to get your take on this, why are you being portrayed in your mind as this white nationalist dude trying to co-opt the religion and colonize Islam?
I don't know, man. I don't know where people come up with this. I mean, okay, look, the idea, that white nationalists have is that, they're being basically just overtaken by immigration. This is, what they believe is threatening to their culture, basically. that they're being either breeded out, and liberalism has plummeted birth rates. You've probably seen that Islamophobic video about how Europe is becoming Islamized and stuff. Like, you remember seeing that? It's like the birth rate in Europe is 2.1, and like Muslims.
I may have seen it, but I'm like, why don't y'all just have more kids? Like, what's the problem?
I know.
Like, well, it's so simple.
I know. Yeah, but that's, I think, the angle that they're taking is just like, well, because he's recommending that European Muslims basically marry each other, like there's some sinister motive behind this, that like, we're going to co-opt Islam and turn it into this right movement, which is completely absurd. I mean, like anyone who's who's Muslim, who's, even if they're not practicing that much, knows that, like once you become Muslim, you're going to be held accountable for your deeds at the end of your life, right? So that's the great equalizer of Islam. Like, and the liberal left, the social justice warriors and white nationalists, they agree on one thing, that white people have advantages, they have all these privileges. One side thinks that it's due to, colonialism and slavery and, like oppression and things like that. The other side believes it's due to, to IQ, basically kind of the same thing, like Western civilization and producing all, like inventions and things like that. But at the end of the day, these are things that are just given to us by Allah. And once you become Muslim from a European background, now you don't have the advantage of having a Muslim family. You don't have the advantage of having, like a Muslim background, or, like Muslim ancestors or role models from your background that were Muslim, or you can't go to Eid prayer and see people from your background. But I look at it a different way. I look at it as, hey, you have all those privileges. That's wonderful. I mean, don't give up on that. Like I tell born Muslims, like, dude, I mean, that's awesome that you have, like all these things. Like you go to Eid prayer, you see people, like your family there, not just that, but your extended family, your countrymen, like you can go to a mosque where you can hear your native language, your cultural language, from your ancestry being spoken. You get to see people from your background. That's great. That's awesome. And it serves as a bulwark for Islam. So even if you're not practicing, that you have some place you can go back to, right? So for converts, especially European descendant converts, we have nothing to fall back on but our practice. And you see a lot of born Muslims who are not practicing at all, who they still consider themselves Muslim. When the census comes on, they tick off Muslim. Even though they're not praying or practicing at all, they still consider themselves Muslim, right? And and instead of saying, oh well, they're not really Muslims, like some religious Muslims might say, tell them, look, like you still have the opportunity, you still have something you can go back to, right? Mm-hmm. But for us, it's like we have nothing to fall back on but our practice. And I think that's why for European descendant converts, it kind of perpetuates this white savior, like problem where, like you get this overzealous white convert who comes into the mosque. They want to try to fit in, so they'll try to do everything. They'll adopt the shalwar kameez and the topi, or the thobe. They'll learn all these things about Islam. The mosque will give them all these high positions in high mosque positions and stuff. Meanwhile, African American converts, and rightly so, are upset at the fact that like we're being put on this pedestal. So in essence, like Islam for Europeans does not want to place European converts on a higher pedestal. We want to come down off that pedestal. We want to work on our own people. We want to give dawah, to the people who are protesting at mosques. I mean, these white guys, these white people who are throwing pigs' heads at mosques and spray painting graffiti and trying to rip hijabs off our sisters, and like saying all these slurs against Muslim women on the street. Mm-hmm. Those are our aunts. Those are our uncles. Those are the people we play bowling with. Those people we play tennis with. These are our people, and it's our responsibility to either show them the truth about Islam, or at the very least take them from a -100 to a -80 or a -90. And by doing that, that removes us from the white savior status that this system is just really perpetuated.
You mentioned the very critical point in all this really is that the beautiful thing and the dangerous thing about being a European descendant white convert Muslim is that you're Muslim because you believe in Islam, because you researched it and you studied it and you believe in it, which is saying more than a lot of what I call spoon-fed Muslims, right? You know, those of us from South Asian or Arab background, right? So you have it's a double-edged sword, I see.
It is.
It's an advantage in the sense that, number one, that's why you're in it for the right reasons. You're not in it because some cultural baggage or, you know, it's convenient for you, right? So the sincerity, so that's what I would think about is like the sincerity is there, right? But the danger side is that like there isn't like a phase, because what happens is, right, we all go through our phases. And this is where I can see where you're coming from, is that when some of us when we start becoming practicing, there's times we might fall back and just like relax a little bit, et cetera, but we're still around Muslims because of our family backgrounds. So we're not going to completely fall off. But if you're a convert and you come in hard and then which you shouldn't come in hard, to be honest. I think that's something that we have to work with folks on, easing them in. Yeah. But if you fall off, you might be falling off because there's nothing, because you're going to go back to what did you know? What are you comfortable with? Going back to the bar, go hang with the boys. If you're in England, getting into fights or soccer games, I don't know. Right. That's the thing that people, I think, need to understand. But like I would like say that, like, look at it from a perspective of strength too, that like it's a very beautiful and sincere thing that you're in it for the reason you're supposed to be Muslim.
Yeah, that's true. I'm going to look at a different angle, though. Sure. And I understand where you're coming from. Mm-hmm. I'm going to introduce a concept that I'm going to introduce in my next video called the Convert Siphon.
Okay.
So what happens is I know a lot of people, a lot of white people that I know who think that Islam is true, right? Who would be like, yeah, you know what, like it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, they don't want to convert because that would involve such a huge jump. Because A, you're going to be ostracized from your family. B, you're coming into a totally different culture, a totally different group of people who, when you go on TikTok, you hear about how much they hate you. You know, like, and I don't want to generalize, because a lot of people, you know, like not a lot of Muslims, some Muslims think that way, but, you know, which is understandable. But it involves such a huge jump that only the ones who are ready to just dive right in actually, you know, accepting Islam as the truth or thinking that it's true is one thing. Diving into a Muslim community or a mosque and becoming a part of that community is a totally different ball of wax. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like we're siphoning off so many people that would become Muslim. But like you said, you know, we're not easing people into Islam. You convert to Islam, you got to pray 5 times a day. You got to fast during Ramadan. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to wear hijab, right? And this sort of convert siphon, we only see white converts, basically, or converts in general, that are basically top-notch, cream of the crop, doing everything. Whereas the ones who are kind of like latently Muslim or believe it's true, it's much more difficult for them to make that jump. So we're not seeing the converts who are just, you know, the converts who are at the same level of born Muslims who are, as you said, are not doing very much at all. So, you know, and like I said, look at the Sahaba. I mean, they took years to solidify their faith before any rules about praying or fasting during Ramadan were actually revealed. And this was the best nation, right? Mm-hmm. Currently, there's no real set of fatwa from any madhabs that I know, or any shaykh or any mujtahids that I know, that have this easing process into Islam. And I think this is why the African American community was so successful, because they started out with the Nation of Islam. So even though, the beliefs were heretical, they still, I think they fasted in December. They learned a lot of some of them were that, like they wore the hijab, they saw gender separation, even though they weren't fully practicing Islam, they were gradually making their way to being, like a fully practicing unit. So, we want to become a kind of like a sub-community, just like the Pakistani sub-community, just like the Syrian sub-community, just like the Somali sub-community, where we have varying levels of religiosity, but you still have that base where you believe in Islam, you think it's true, and even though you're not practicing, even though if you're a woman, you're not wearing hijab, or like you're not praying, you believe in it, and you've made the commitment that you eventually want to reach that point. And then you'll start to see more European descendant converts come into the fold, and gradually work their way up. You want to see a range of different levels of religiosity, which is not what we're seeing. We're just seeing the cream of the crop right now.
The problem our community would say is that, like, well, you enter into Islam completely. And I'm not saying I agree with that. Like, obviously, I think we all have to, because here's the thing. When we talk to people, we say, like, so I've got a buddy. He's Asian. I think he believes Islam is true. Sometimes he talks like a Muslim. It's funny. But, man, that pork is too good. Like, Asian folks and their pork, man.
Yeah, and that's Canadian bacon.
There is no meal without pork for the Asian folks. So he's always telling me about, like, pork, and he's like, man, what about that pork? And I was like, because, like, I explained to him, like, listen, bro, just become Muslim and eat pork. All right? So be a pork eating Muslim. He's like, well, is that hypocritical? Because isn't Muslim someone who submits to the will of God, to the will of Allah? So if I'm not submitting that, so the idea, so he was like, I would be a non-practicing Muslim. And for him, that was like an oxymoron. So he's kind of, and so the point I'm getting is that I think when we talk to people who are not Muslim, we do tell them, like, listen, we'll worry about that stuff later. The problem that happens is this. We tell them that before they convert. And once they convert, like, yo, bro, yo, sister, there's that niqab. I see, why are you showing your ankle now? What's going on?
Yeah.
Right? So we haven't connected that. So one of the organizations that, like, I have a lot of respect for and I support financially is Tatlif. Okay. And I don't know if you've heard of Tatlif. They're in San Francisco and they're in Chicago. Okay. Because that's where I've gone and seen people. That's when I first was, like, in Chicago. I'd go into spots and I would be like, these people are all Muslims? Like, I'd be the outlier in a way. There's an organization, I think Chicago, and maybe that's the beauty of a big city, right? And, like, I remember I went to, there's a organization based out of Chicago in the suburbs called Web Foundation. And they have, like, classes and kids programs, etc. And I remember the first time my wife and I went to a class there. And it was like a Desi teacher, Professor Omar Muzaffar. He's been on Mad Mamluks before. He's well known. He's the Loyola chaplain teaching a class. But I'm looking around, and it's like, I mean, it could be like a white grandmother in there who's Muslim that I would never have known, right? And so I think, so there are these environments that are, like, kind of, like, popping up already. Now it's like, how do we connect that? But they are also, I get, it's a thing where they're like, oh, not everyone there's of European background, but I definitely get that vibe that they're very comfortable in their own skin too, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's where you're kind of at. Tatlif is nice because Tatlif understands that, and because obviously race isn't the only issue. People struggle with sexuality, and although, because people come into Islam, they're like, they could have, like, issues with, like, same-sex attraction, right? Or other things. And then we have to navigate that, right? Yeah. But I think Muslims just can't. That's the thing. We are not rare. Like, the problem is that this has to, what I think, the only way this works is, I don't even know if it's, like, it works institutionally from someone like yourself who understands it, okay? But you can't the mainstream Muslim organizations, for the most part, unless they have a convert, like, running it, or they have that experience, are not going to be able to, I would say, navigate that properly, because they're just going to be like, well, you got to, do everything, or they feel like, oh, there's like a kind of like a timeline. Oh, you've got to be doing things by X amount of time. All right, so yeah, we said you couldn't drink when you came in, and now you're still having a drinking problem a couple years later. What's going on, right? Or whatever. It's people grow at their own pace.
Yeah,
that's the thing that we have to understand.
Yeah. I mean, Numan Ali Khan commented on the ayah in the Quran that said, it's not, don't invite people to Islam. It's invite people to the path of your master. Mm-hmm. And he elaborated on that, and that the tafsir is that, like it's like a freeway. Some people are going to be far ahead on the freeway. Some of them are going to be like way far back, right? But our goal is just to get them right back on the right path again. I mean, you're going to get people who were alcoholics their entire lives, or did drugs their whole lives. You're going to get people like me who didn't do any of that stuff, did very little of that stuff. So that's going to take some time. For some people. I mean, there's no real cookie cutter approach that you can take. What I do know is a lot of these mosques are just simply not prepared to handle converts. Like I was telling you about that one town, Chatham. There's a Darul Uloom in Chatham. This city is 43,000 people. It's in like a totally white suburb. It's an old school, and it's basically just a class for kids doing their hifz. It's a boarding school, right? All the men are dressed in like full thobe and like topi, everything, man. Full South Asian garb.
They're all South Asian guys, yeah.
All of them, 100%. And then all the women are all wearing black niqabs. Mm-hmm. And it's in the middle of this. And I talked to the school head about this, and he agreed with me. He's just like, yeah, we don't have any of the tools or resources to deal with white people who are coming to, any white person who come to this mosque. They'd have to assimilate completely. Ismail Kamdar, I think who's on our Madame Luke's feed, he had a wonderful lecture on urf, which is basically culture. Because in South Africa, the same thing happened. The Muslims in South Asia are both basically mostly from Indian descent. But they brought in fatwa from like 300 years ago in India and tried to apply it to the South African cultures, because there's so many, and didn't work. Like they were trying to give dawah to Zulus. And the Zulus were like, we don't want to become Muslim because we don't eat spicy food. We don't want to become Muslim because, we don't want to wear the clothes you're wearing, right? And, like Omar Farouk Abdullah, he commented on this on his video on Islam, the Cultural Paradigm. And that, no, like we shouldn't be doing this. Like, they're going to be, if they want, they can become Muslim, but they're going to stay Zulus. And they're going to make great Muslims, right? So,
yeah,
it's an important aspect of Islam. It is in the Quran, in Surat Al-Araf, ayah like 199. It says, the English translation it doesn't encompass the whole thing. It just says enjoying what is good, but it literally says urf, and urf is like a good accepted practice within the culture, right? And you can't take away those things, right? I mean, look.
By the way, is there some background noise going on your end?
Oh, let me just close the door. It's my wife talking on the phone. I'll be right back.
No problem.
Right, hold on. Okay, I'm back.
Yeah, cool. So I mean, I think that's where you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So that's kind of like the whole thing. I think we're just piecing that together, right? I mean, and again, I don't see why your organization is causing I never did see the problem with it, right? It just seems to be like but there's so much I think wounds, and people are like, and now people are saying that, well, okay, Robert's organization isn't about that. We can acknowledge that, but then they should at least recognize that it takes time to heal, and this is not the right time, et cetera, et cetera. you know, one thing I do look at your organization, because when I look at white converts, I do see different frames of it. There's different types, right? So you've got your like white, like leftist folks. Like some of these folks have like white guilt. It's almost like if they were up to them, they wouldn't want to be white.
I know.
And I know these guys. You know, you met those guys, right?
Well, that's most of our detractors are other white converts. Everyone else supports it. It's like
the other ones.
I'm more African American Muslim support organization than white converts.
So but like, and then you've got the person who's like, you know, a more like they go in hard, like religiously. Like you'll meet the brother because you'll often the brother I met like named Mikhail in Toronto 20 years ago at the University of Toronto. I mean, I think he was rolling with Tabligh Jamaah. So he had he'd been Muslim 6 months, already had his beard growing out. It was like you start doing the things that you see. You're dressed, you're wearing a kurta and a thobe. If you're getting married, it's gonna be some desi girl with like niqab, right? You're eating biryani, you know, like, so it's just like, but you're a white dude, like, you know, you know. And so I couldn't figure out. I meet these guys, I'm like, are you serious? You sound like, oh, this dude's like, I was like, oh, you're Zach.
I know.
Like, what?
Well, you know, there's nothing to fall back on. I mean, like, you know, like I talked to a lot of these sisters beforehand who ended up, you know, in these marriages to born Muslims that ended up in divorce. And they said, you know, I would have married a white convert, but there were none available. You know, we don't have the marriage setup process that you guys have, for example. Like, you know, like the family will talk to other families from the same background. You know, they'll meet each other. They'll look at compatibility. You know, we don't have any of that. Right. So
it's a numbers game though, but I also feel that as we have more generations, it'll pop up. I would recommend, this is my take at least. I think that as your community starts growing, is that relocation, communities built by like relocation, right? You move the places. So for example, if you look at a place like, so Chicago's a spot, okay? Chicago, you have a lot of converts there. You look at Pittsburgh, like, so I went to Pittsburgh, what was it? End of June, right before the 4th of July, right? They've got a community there that is 95% converts on the north side of Pittsburgh. And the people who are living there, the ones I met at least, are non-Pittsburgh natives. They came for the community. There's one brother, he became Muslim 27 years ago. He's like a lumberjack from California, right? He came through. There's a brother who was like, did time in prison, white convert from Wisconsin. There's Sidi Hamza Perez, who I interviewed, who I got on the podcast. You know, Puerto Rican from New York City. And these guys showed me, they took me around their spot and they were explaining to me. And I think what has to happen is that, like, part of the work is that you kind of go to the spots and start building in that way, right? I think it may be a challenge to be in, like, you know, and I'm sure there's like, it's Toronto, I know it's super expensive. And I'm sure it's not the easiest to, like, as a Canadian to come to America. And now all the Americans want to go to Canada. But you look at places like Allentown, Pennsylvania. I don't know if you heard about Allentown. That's that's where Sheikh Yahya Rodis is, right? So people are starting to go there. Ismail Royer moved to Allentown, Pennsylvania, right? So you've got, like, people are starting to gravitate to these, because when you're looking at your families, what's best for your kids, that's how you start. And then these organizations, Islam for Europeans, as I'm understanding it, because the white converts are giving you crap about it, it's for the non-white, it's for the white non-Muslims who are, you know, need to see some semblance of that the idea that a white person could be Muslim. That's what I'm understanding.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. It's a huge part of it, because a lot of them just don't realize. I mean, I was listening to the radio back in like just a few years ago, like 2017. And this old guy on the radio, and he's talking about, like, how Muslims don't like white people. And then he's talking about Louis Farrakhan, like, he's thinking that, like, Louis Farrakhan represents, like, Sunni Islam. I just, like, there's just so much ignorance out there, really. So, I mean, you know, there needs to be something. That's a huge part of it. There's so many stakeholders involved in Islam for Europeans. You know, like, anyone who's tangentially related to either, you know, like European background or Islam in general has a stake in this. But a huge part is dispelling the myths and misconceptions about Islam. B, making European peoples realize that, yeah, you can't convert to Islam, and Muslims actually recommend, that we keep our culture, and there's an Islamic basis for it as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what's been really lacking. I mean, we've been trying. I mean, there's been this huge conflict between Islam and Europe for 1,300 years. I mean, that's how far it's gone back. I look at the movie like Moneyball. Have you seen Moneyball, Mahim?
Yep.
With Brad Pitt?
Yep, of course.
Yeah, so the scouts ran things, and the way they got players in was going for 150 years, until Billy Bean, adapted, the book Sabermetrics from Bill James, right? And it caused a huge stir. And the scout told him, you've been discounting what scouts have been doing for 150 years, right? And then he said, adapt or die. And that's kind of what was going on, except it's much longer than that. I mean, what we've been trying with Europe just has not been working out, and the West, and what we call the Anglosphere. And, it's just creating more and more animosity between Islam and people from European backgrounds. Nationalist groups are on the rise, and it's just, what's the solution? And and these organizations can try all these things, let's stop talking to them altogether. Let's make Islamophobia illegal. And it's just been getting worse. So we're just taking an alternative approach. It's our responsibility as Muslims from European backgrounds to give dawah to the people from our groups. If you look at, just read the Quran, Musa, Ya Qawmi, Nuh spent centuries giving dawah to his own people. Yunus, these were their nations, and they hated Islam. Mm-hmm. Same thing with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Quraysh. That's a perfect example, and they ended up converting to Islam. I mean, even people from South Asian background. I mean, your ancestors were Hindus. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they didn't have a very high opinion of Islam, right? Mm-hmm. So this is how we change things. Yeah. And you're right. There's just a lot of wounds that I can't even begin to understand on more than a superficial level. I used to get really angry when I watch lectures or interviews with Omar Suleiman, but I get it now. I'm trying to understand. This is where this guy's coming from. He gets death threats from white people. So the fact that he's basically even interviewing these Trump supporters is huge for him, right? So we have it in the fact that just on a visceral level, we don't have this kind of these wounds, so we have that ability to just seamlessly talk to the people from the same background as us.
Gotcha. Hey, as we wrap up here, any final thoughts on anything that we didn't cover that you want to get through?
Yeah, I mean, embedded in this is the whole, not only are some of our detractors other white converts, but I think the other detractors is the people who, I guess, who take more like a pan-Islamic, pan-cultural approach to Islam. And this was big in the early 2000s. And I did want to talk about this because, when I first converted to Islam.
You mean like Islamist?
Sort of like an Islamic monoculturalism, where it's like our culture is Islam. And anything negative or anything that we do that's haram is quote unquote cultural, right? So, they'll say, South Asian brothers playing cricket while Maghrib is playing, they miss Maghrib prayer. Oh, well, that's cultural. No, they miss Maghrib prayer. There's nothing haram about playing cricket, right? Yeah. So, I mean, and I think this came out of for two reasons. One is that, like you said, because of the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and a lot of these religious leaders from the Muslim lands, they thought, they just saw the division in the Muslim world. So they think when they come to the West, it's okay. We're here in America. We're Muslim now. We should all be united. So let's get rid of culture, get rid of nationality, and let's just all be Muslim, right? So they took it to kind of like the other extreme,
Mm-hmm.
right? And another thing that kind of was better this was kind of like liberalism and universalism. So they wanted to get kind of like make Islam kind of like this universalist religion, which is true, but at the same time, you know, like we can't forget who we are. We all come from different cultural backgrounds, and I don't think that we should completely shed that at all. I think that we should, you know, embrace it to an extent. I mean, we look back to the Hadith. You know, when someone asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is it wrong to love your nation? Like, no, that's not. It's not wrong to love your nation, except when they do wrong. Okay, and I think by sort of rejecting our own culture, what we're doing is that we're cutting off people from our background, and we're representatives of Islam. You know, so I don't think that African American Muslims should cut themselves off from the Nation of Islam. I think they have an important role to play. They have an important role to play with African Americans who are not Muslim. You know, and I totally get why the fact that they want to be very deep into their own culture. So I think we have to find a balance, and I think this kind of pan-culturalist approach, which was big in the early 2000s, we're kind of seeing the fallout of that. And I think converts, especially European converts, like I said, we don't have these things. So to just get rid of completely a nationality and just be one monoculturalist approach, we all wear the thobe and the kufi and just eat chicken biryani, even though I love biryani, don't get me wrong. That has really alienated us from our families and our community. And these are the people that we should be concentrating on.
Yeah, well, I think when you point to that, it's not sustainable. That's what we realized. I think, because I became practicing, and the bulk, as people know my stories, that I came in through Dawah Salafiyah, right?
Yeah.
And a very Saudi version of Dawah Salafiyah, right? Saudi influence. So like the red and white checkered gutra, the white thobe, you know what I'm saying? And like the scholars, I would say that these are the ulama, and there would be the kibar ulama from Saudi Arabia. And so there was this idea, and I would like impose that. I would give Jummah khutbahs at Ohio State, like to a bunch of college kids about, we got to follow the ulama of Saudi Arabia. So that's how out of touch you, and you realize later you're just being an idiot. But, I think it comes down to like, you realize at a certain point, like, all right, now I'm out of college, I got to get a job, I'm working. And then you're starting to see reality is like, this is not sustainable. And then as you start learning, and I think part of this is like, people who stay in that same boat, they never graduate to learning like the next layer, right? That's what it did for me. I think that's why people. So you do have people who are like there are brothers I know that I could probably go back that I used to kick it with 15 years ago that are probably on the same tip, but they haven't like. There's been no growth. They haven't been like, all right, have you memorized any Quran? Like, nah, because we gotta like be like we had to review the different texts on like not rebelling against the rulers. Like a completely irrelevant, text as far as you're concerned, right? Or the deviations of Sayyid Qutb, right? You got it memorized, but you can barely get Fatiha out with tajweed, right? And I think that's where, but for the majority of us, that approach is not sustainable. These groups tend to be fringe in hindsight. You kind of, and the problem is that we don't tend to learn our lessons. We sometimes get caught up in the social media age. We get caught up in some of this drama that when you think about it, you realize in 5-10 years, it's going to be completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned on a tweet the other day, Mort and I were talking, and I was like, it was just like the years of like trying to conform to this like the Saudi version of Islam. It was to the point, man, where I remember the masjid I would go to. It's like if a Saudi international or like an Emirati international student came in, and some of these international students, they were not like the most religious dude. They had money. They were on like because they had like some kind of scholarship from their government to study. And man, it's like we worship these dudes, man. It's like, oh, mashallah, ya Sheikh, the brothers from the Mamlaka, from the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the noble kingdom where King Fahd, I think, was still alive. You know, Malik Fahd. I remember one time I met the Saudi kid. I'm like, mashallah, so you know about Sheikh Saleh Al Fawzan? I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, man? Oh my God. And he was like, you know, and you know, there would be this stuff. I remember I was so out of touch that I had a friend who's I'm still in touch with. He's Lebanese. He grew up in Saudi, right? So he sent me this thing, and he's Lebanese, and he was talking about, you know, there was the typical Israel-Palestine talk popping off, right? And I was like, I was the president of the Muslim Student Association, okay? So he sends me an email, and he's like, hey, there's this protest going on for like Palestine, Students for Justice for Palestine. Maybe the MSA can like cooperate with them. And I was like, I copy-pasted a fatwa about why it's impermissible to participate in protests.
Wow.
From Saudi Arabia.
Wow.
And sent it back to him. And it's like, yeah, hey, this is not from the religion. And it's funny because the way we would talk is this, when you look back, you were like, we just make jokes about it. Like, yeah, Yani, verily, this is not from the way of the Salaf. Ya Ikhwan, you know? And I was like, but it's just like, it's so fake.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
I know it's it's you know, I got caught up in that too, and that I know I set my career back so many years, and that's something I really regret.
Right.
But like I mean, just to wrap up, I mean, like, I want to see the day, and I know there's a lot of wounds on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot of wounds for Muslims. You know, like everything I described, colonialism, slavery, and everything. There's a lot of wounds for Europeans. You know, I hope that all goes away one day. Like, people where, I'd say you get a sister comes from Pakistan to Canada, you know, like she's new here. She's at a town that's mostly white. People stare at her on the bus, right? You know, she doesn't feel comfortable. She might feel resentment, right? She goes to I4E and sees 20 white people giving her salam and giving her a hug and, you know, giving her lasagna for iftar. And that's, I think that would just, and that's the best thing that we can do. I mean, like, you know, and that's what our vision is, basically, you know, and it's not going to be easy, you know, it's like you said, you know, it's controversial. It's very controversial on all ends, you know, like there's a lot of white nationalists who just hate Islam. You know, they think it's just get out of Europe and it has nothing to do with us. You know, that's going to take a lot of work on that end too. But, you know, I take pride in the fact that, you know, so many people are both for and against it on all sides. And, you know, I revel in this opportunity. But I hope a century down the line that they don't treat me like some Saudi sheikh. Like they'll have like pictures of Rob like up on the wall, and, you know, oh, this is Sheikh Dufour, you know, from Islam for Europeans. And, yeah, you know, someone writes a refutation about me that's like 50,000 words, and then someone writes a re-refutation that's like 100,000 words. And I hope that doesn't happen. You know.
Sure. So
anyway.
Where can people find out more about your organization? How can they engage?
The YouTube channel, Islam for Europeans, Islam, the number 4 Europeans. I'm also on Twitter at Robert of Canada. And then our website, islamforeuropeans.com. And that's, so that's if you want to know more. And I posting right now my videos on reasons why European sub-communities are needed. But if you want to have more content, inshallah, that's more like diverse and everything. So.
Islam for Europeans, it's was Islam FOR Europeans taken?
I have no idea. I don't know why we put the number 4. I mean, maybe because it's, you know, easier to type. I have no idea. It wasn't started by me. It was started by a Russian brother. So I mean, I actually don't even run the website, but I took it and ran with it. I'm just like, yeah, I mean, you know, this is right up my alley and everything. Sure.
Sounds good. All right. Well, viewers, listeners up there, you can check us out, YouTube, Facebook. The audio of this conversation will be up on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Pocket Casts. And if there's anything else you need me to be on, shoot me an email at info@saltedstickers.com for my special guest. Robert Dufour, I'm your host, Mahin the podcaster, signing off.